I had no doubt whatsoever about taking the role on. I mean, it was a central character. It was the lead character in the family, which was very important for me at that time. But what I remember saying that when we went to the read with Nick Lyndhurst and Leonard Pierce, who played Grandad, and Nick and I and Leonard went to have a drink when we knew we'd got the part. And what I said about the script to them then, I said, this is a very unusual script, in my estimation. I said, it's not a sitcom as such. I think it's a situation drama. And I think from that moment on, that's what happened to the piece. I could see that it wasn't just joke, which most sitcoms are. This was so different because it was, it was story-led, and the humour came out of the characters and the story, which was quite unusual at that time for comedy. Some of the hierarchy, not all, I mean some of the hierarchy was against casting me because I'd been playing such hapless characters and was sort of known for it, if you like. I'd never played a leading role or carried a series, and I believe they didn't think that I had the range as an actor to fulfill the aspirations of the lead role in this new series, to get it off the ground. One or two people had thrown their hat in the ring against cast me, but Ray Butt, to his good auspices, bless him, he was the director. And there was another director that I was working with at the time called Sidney Lotterby, who we were doing Open All Hours. And with his and Ray Butt's conviction that they knew that I had the range, that I was an actor that's talents had not been explored, they pushed for me, and that finally swayed the vote, because I suppose the casting vote would have been with the director, which was Ray Butt. And he had from behind him, he had people from the top floor, and he had John Sullivan all saying, he's not right, that David Jason will never do it. No, he can't do it. And yet Ray stuck to his guns. And, well, there you are, the rest is history, really. I think that what makes Derek Trotter tick is John Sullivan's script to start with. I mean, obviously, that's the genius behind it. I mean, that's the beginning. I always used to say that, John makes the bullets and I just fire them, really. The strength of the character that we eventually developed, because it was once John had seen how where I was taking the character, or how I thought the character would go, he then started to write for those strengths, well, for all of the characters. And what he eventually developed and put into it, and I think this is the thing, he's got a heart of gold. He's a tough, steely out exterior with a very much like John Sullivan, I suppose, with a soft heart. He's very emotional, very family orientated and driven, and in a strange way that a lot of people will disagree. He's very honest. He's a very honest man, and he's got so many good qualities. Yes, he wheels and deals, and he does a little bit of this, but he's very interesting in that he would never harm anybody, not unless they harmed his family or harmed him. He's a big negotiator. He'd talk his way out of trouble. But as I say, the most of it has come through John Sullivan's writing, I think, and we've extended it all the time into more and more reality, which is the things that we've got away. As I said originally, we get away from situation comedy into situation drama, where he sees the birth of his child, for example. That was a really moving experience, which I think John called on his own experience. But to put that in a situation comedy had been unheard of at that time. So you had to draw on tremendous confidence of your writer and your actor and your character to get away with something that you're going to do the opposite to what you normally do. Instead of trying to make people laugh, you're really trying to bring them along emotionally, make them cry. So Derek Trotter is a very rich character, full of all human emotions, and we have used them all and enjoyed using them all. I think that the way John had described working class people and council house people, if you like, but was quite brilliant. Because if you quoted one of the series at the time, which is Till Death Us Do Part, and they showed Warren Mitchell's character as the big. It was very funny, and I think Warren Mitchell was brilliant. But that was a family at war, really, a family at anger. Whereas what John tried to tune into was a huge mixture of like the real people are. They cry, they laugh, they take the mick out of each other, they go on trips together, they go down the pub. And one of the great things I think that John did, which I'm very pleased to say, and I wish they'd perhaps take a note at EastEnders, is that the pub was the central meeting place, and it's full of very, very amusing characters, and I'm sure they still are today. But sometimes in some series that you go into, and it's supposed to go into an East End pub, and everybody's at each other's throats. Well, John had managed to tap into the reality of ordinary people. They have a great, great sense of humour, and that was John's great strength. When we were first all working on the original first series, we were all feeling our way. We were all trying to unravel these characters. We were all trying to find what made them tick. We were all trying to find where the centre of the humour was. We were trying to develop everything about it, trying to make it better and funnier and whatever. So some of the stage directions that John had put in were very useful. But as time moved on, they became unnecessary. So I think that both John and I would agree that you don't need to, don't teach us to suck eggs, as it were, because we needed all that help in the first series, and then it moved. And as it moved on, we all became a little more confident in what we were doing and which direction our characters were going and how we would deal with the scenes. So, and yes, initially it was a great help. Well, the great thing about the BBC in those days and our working together, all of us, and John and I in particular, was after the show was a tradition. We'd all go to the bar, the BBC bar, and we'd have a few drinks and unwind and talk about what bits when the show went well and what bits didn't, and then we'd all go out for a meal or people would drift off. But during that time, when we were at the bar having a laugh and a chat, quite a lot of things would pass around, and one of the things was that he and I were talking, and he said to me, he said, I understand. He said, you used to be an electrician. So I said, yeah, that's right, I was, before I gave it all up and tried to become an actor. So he said, my father was a bit of an electrician. So I said, oh, what's that? He said, we used to do everything, really. He was, he used to, well, see, when he was an electrician, he said, and he said, he did this, he went to this house, and he was supposed to be a plumber or whatever. And he said, and then he told me the story, and his story was, he was only just telling a little story. He wasn't trying to be amusing. He said, but what happened is, was one funny incident. He said, they wanted this chandelier cleaned, and my father, being, ready for anything to earn a few extra quid, said, don't worry, Gov, we can do that for you, because he was with a gang of guys. And this very posh house, and this guy said, well, you sure you can do it? Oh, yeah, so we're very experienced chandelier cleaners, sir. He said, and what they did, there was two chandeliers. He said, they went upstairs and undid the bolt. He said, and hit it with a hammer. He said, and the wrong one came down. He said, they were under this one, and the other one fell. Well, I was on the floor. I was hysterical. I said, John, you have to write it for it. He said, well, no, it's only just telling you a story. I said, but it's so funny. And he said, oh, do you think so? I said, yeah, it's hysterical. He said, oh, I'll think about that then. So during the next rehearsal, when we were rehearsing, he said, I'm thinking about it. He said, I've got the end. He said, I've got no idea how to get them there. And I said, well, that's up to you, John. You're the writer. I only said that I think the idea's funny. So anyway, John went off. And you see, it's part of sort of history that everybody remembers the chandelier. And it makes me laugh. Then it all came out of just anecdotes. John Sullivan and I sort of talking. John and I used to enjoy each other's company, and we would chat and this, that, and the other. And he came into rehearsals one day, and we were just chatting, and he said, "God," he said, "I saw something amused me." He said last night. So I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I went down to the wine bar." I said, because he had this local bar where he used to live. He's just to have a couple of drinks. He said, and I'm standing there, he's quietly in the corner having a drink. He said, and there's a bloke. He said, at the bar. And he said, those flip-top bar things, where the people come in and out. I said, yeah. He said, he was near there. He said, and what happened was, the barman came out and left the lid up. And this bloke went to lean, and it wasn't there. And he just recovered himself. He didn't fall. And he looked around, expecting people to have seen him, but nobody had. But he was pretending he meant to do it, said John. When John told me the scenario that he'd seen this guy nearly lose his balance in the wine bar, I just said to John, oh, I've got to fall through. Because John actually presented it to me as an idea that he wanted to put into the show, and he said, what do you think? And when he told me the story, I said, well, I think I've got to fall right the way through the bar. And that's when John said, oh, no, the guy didn't do that. I said, no, I know he didn't do that. I said, but if I do it, I will. So John said, oh, all right then, if you think that's better. So the next thing we know, John writes it into the script. And, it was, what's quite interesting about that is that there's quite a lot of little elements, in order to bring off the surprise. There's quite a lot of interesting work. One of the things I remember, someone came up to me one day and said, I want to ask you a question, Mr. Jason. I said, yes, certainly. He said, that thing when you fell through the bar? And I said, yes. And he said, was it an accident? And I said, what do you mean, was it an accident? He said, did you mean to do it? And that to me was, yes, I had thought, I said yes, and I went away and I thought, oh my God, if only you knew. The construction that went into that, to make that work, was very interesting. But people don't think it's work, they think like that chap did, he think, oh, you just do it and it just happens. But no, it was like most of these things, like most things, there's a lot of thought and construction, and a lot of experience teaches you that, and you can only, I think, the best comedy comes from people who have experience. Where I had an advantage of those sort of physical things, like falling through the hatch, etc., is because I had a tremendous grounding in the theatre. And I was the one, when I was in the theatre, I did all the Brian Rix farces, and I was on tour in plays, and I did all sorts of... And one of the great things that I did was it was very physical. I was very fortunate in being able to enjoy throwing myself about through hatches and tumbling. I spent 18 months in the play No Sex, Please We're British, which was tremendously physical. Even getting thrown out of doors and diving into settees and diving through hatches and getting dragged up to the ceiling in chandeliers and one thing and another. So it was quite natural for me. I was fortunate it comes to me quite, easily then. You have to agree that it was collaborative. It always is in anything I do. You collaborate with people, with the director, with the writer, and with the costume designer. You're quite right. I think I was one of the first people who had pressed jeans And we did it by running a stitch down the front, so they were permanently in, because Derek Trotter would think that was, really cool. So John's thoughts were not quite the same, so I had to convince him that that's the way I wanted to go, and he just said, okay, if that's the way that you want to go, I'll go with you. And so with the costume designer, I then approached the costume designer and said, look, there's this amazing guy that I used to know in the East End, and he used to wear a camel hair coat, beautifully laundered shirts, wonderful neat ties, polished shoes, you could see your face in them, trousers that fitted like a glove. And I said, that's the way I want to go. So he said, okay. So that's how that's the way we went for that look. John Sullivan decided that when we got to series 5, 6, whatever it was the yuppies were coming in, it was all about yuppies. So he decided that he'd make Derek Trotter a yuppie, and he's got a power dress, and he had the briefcase, and so John introduced all those elements for the yuppie, and of course he scored brilliantly, because at that time, and I think it was right, there was a film with Michael Douglas, I believe, and who had these amazing braces in this film, and he was he was a yuppie, he was a whiz kid on Wall Street or something. Can't remember the name of it. Well, of course, John introduced that of course now Derek Trotter had to wear these braces to hold up his trousers and walked around showing his braces. So again, the genius of John Sullivan is that he never let grass grow under his feet. He kept on using whatever was current at the time. And that's really how that power dressing business all came about, because suddenly you found Trotter in suits and ties, and this big Mac he'd got that done up in the front, and all of that was described by John. The biggest delight is that it's crossing age groups, meaning that when we were working on it all those years ago, that was for our generation, if you like. But to find that young kids of 10 and 12 and whatever, perhaps weren't even born when the first series went out, are finding it really funny and amusing, is a great reward. Because these sort of things don't happen very often, that you can be in something that transcends time. And one of the qualities, I think, that makes it endearing and lasting is it's very Laurel and Hardy in my mind. That you can show an old Laurel and Hardy film, and kids of today will find them funny. Why? Because basically they are funny. Laurel and Hardy is about an unknowing fool and a knowing fool. And I think that the qualities that you have in Fools and Horses can be sometimes very similar to that. That we're all fools. All of the characters, are fools. Rodney is a fool. Derek can be a fool at times, and Uncle Albert or Grandad, are always fools. So that is its strength. We're not frightened of taking the mickey out of ourselves, or John Sullivan's not frightened of taking the mickey out of ourselves, and makes the characters vulnerable. And if the characters are vulnerable, then I believe that people warm to them, and there's nothing really vulgar about them, if you think about it. They're just endearing. Uncle Albert and Grandad have been the most endearing characters, I think. Nick's Rodney is a wonderful creation of a very, very mixed personality. And then there's Derek Trotter, who swings between the two. So fortunately, I think John's tapped that magical quality where it seems to be timeless. No one gets hurt. It's not cruel, and it's, dare I say this, it's simple humour. The jokes are the story, the characters are not that complicated. You know about them when you see them. You can readily absorb them, and you trust them, and that's just the magic, I think, that John's managed to create. John is able to, through comedy, address issues that nobody else would dare to do in a situation comedy, or in a comedy drama, as I said, but we call it a situation comedy. And I remember, again, with fondness at the time, that very sadly we were starting to do the series, and we were out filming, and we heard that we knew Leonard wasn't well, who played Grandad. Leonard Pierce wasn't well, played Grandad, and he'd been in hospital, and we were managing to film it without him. And suddenly someone came on the set and said he'd unfortunately died. So we stopped filming, and that was it. We just all went home. We were very, very, very sad. And within the week, we came to a meeting, and we had to discuss what we were going to do with the series. And one or two of the bigwigs has said it was very, very sad, but we must carry on. And what we'll do is we'll get a look-alike, and we'll carry on and have someone else play Grandad. Well, John Sullivan and I were absolutely appalled, and we said no way, we weren't going to do that, because that would be an insult to the memory of a dear friend. So we talked about what we were going to do, and someone came up with the idea that maybe we need the three, because we needed the three generations. And someone said, well, maybe we could get an aunt that could come in, and we could have a woman in it. And I said, no way, I'm not playing it with a woman. And they said, well, why? I said, it's got nothing to do with it. I said, but how can we treat a woman like we treat the old man? It's funny that I call him a daft old git and throw him in the back of the van. It's acceptable. I couldn't do that with a woman. So that idea didn't go down very well. So we eventually, a few people had written in, and we eventually found this wonderful chap who was Uncle Albert, eventually became Uncle Albert, and we decided that how we would introduce him would be that we would have a funeral for Grandad, which was Leonard Pierce. And in the wake afterwards, one of his relations would come out of the woodwork, and he would be Uncle Albert. So John now had to write this in like a week. And he said, John, are you serious that that's what you want to do? And he said, yes, I want to do it because I don't want, nobody in a family wants anyone to die. We don't. He said, and it happens. It just happens in real life. I said, and we've had it. We've had a bereavement. We've lost our granddad. So he said, I think we ought to have the funeral for him. And that's what we ought to do. We do it on television, and we will do it in real life, because we all went to Leonard's funeral. And that was the most amazing thing, that John Sullivan, in a week, took hold of grasped the nettle, and decided to have a funeral of a character that was in a series on screen. Never been done before. And that came out of John's compassion. That's, I think, a direct analysis of how emotional John is as a man. He insisted that that's what he wanted to do out of respect for and the love of a character and an actor, which you don't get many people who have that much respect for actors. Fortunately, we can say that very, very confidently here in the BBC. No names, no pacto. Well, as Derek Trotter would say, because I was just going to say that, my most favouriteest thing of all time, I think that there's so many. The chandelier, for obvious reasons, because it came out of a conversation that John and I had. Falling Through the Hatch, because it is now become a piece of classic comedy biz. But I suppose all in all, there's so many rich shows. But I think one of my favourites is the Blow Up Dolls. He's so silly. They're so silly. They're just so funny. When they go off behind the bar, and they just spring up. I mean, I think that it's very difficult, really, honestly, to say which is my best or most favourite, because every one of them, I think, has somewhere inside you just a favourite moment, because we spent so many years, so much time having such a good time, really enjoying ourselves. We had a fantastic team and wonderful actors, and no one, I don't think one person ever had a crossword with anyone in the whole 20 years. John Sullivan used to bite his fingers down to the elbow when we were recording, because I would be notorious for drying in certain places, and John would go ape because he think I might have screwed up my timing, but I used to manage to get away with it. Now I think they all have a place in the heart, because for me it's the living Laurel and Hardy show, I suppose.
I was about to go out the door, and this big parcel arrived through, and I ripped it open and said BBC, BBC, BBC written all over it, and I thought... So I opened it up and it said, it's a series, Only Fools and Horses would like you to have a look at the part of Rodney. And I was late at this point, and I thought, well, I'll come back tonight and I'll read them then. And I went out and met my friends, had a few beers, whatever we were going to do. Came back to the flat and had a look at these scripts. And I hadn't read, there was a PS on this note saying, can you come tomorrow morning and read? Sorry, it's a bit of a rush, but we've got to do it very, very quickly. So I thought, I've got to read these now if I'm going to go to this interview. And so I just started reading page 1, episode 1, about midnight, 12:30, something like that. And I was reading them until about 4:30, laughing out loud, and thought, I can't wait to do this. I must get this audition, because I thought it was just a regular audition and I was going to turn up in the casting offices and there'd be 8 other people going for the job. I didn't realise it was my job. And so I met Ray Butt, who's a little guy like this, and he said, can you read them? I read them. He went, all right, thanks. And that was it. Off I went. And thought, oh well, blown that then, it's a shame. And they called me back a couple of weeks later and said, can you come and read with some other people? Which I did. Didn't read with David at that point. Read with Leonard. And then eventually they said, okay, we'd like you to read with this chap called David Jason. And it was only when the 3 of us read together that the people on the other side of the desks went, wow, this is good stuff. And that's when I realised that I'd had the job all along. But there was something quite magical, that moment that David and Leonard and I first read in that tiny little office, Ray Butt's office, because there are 3 different generations of actor with 3 very different styles of acting, and it all just gelled straight away. And John and Ray went, yep, we'll go with this. This is what we'll do. And off we went. We all went off to the bar and thought, so have we got the job or what? Is that it? I'm Nick, by the way. You're Leonard. Oh, David, hello. And the rest is history, really. I think we were very conscious when we first started rehearsals that we mustn't be seen to be antagonistic towards each other. I mean, on the page, it would have been quite easy to read it as if Del doesn't like Rodney, Rodney doesn't like Del, and they don't like Grandad, and there's these 3 old farts living in a council house, and it could be quite oppressive. But there was such love in the script, really. I mean, you could see that Del loved Rodney and would do anything for him, and vice versa, and they all loved the Grandad, and there was a great family bond. And it was apparent very early on that Del had taken Rodney under his wing, and he should probably have gone into care after the mother had died, the father had gone. Grandad wasn't going to be any help, so it was down to Del to look after Rodney. And they loved each other. I think that's probably what we decided was the most important thing. Yes, of course, they take the mickey out of each other all the time, and they're telling each other to shut up, you soppy old goat, and all this sort of stuff. But there is a central love which we thought was the most important thing to portray. There's always been a battle of wits between Del and Rodney. They are perpetually scoring points off each other in the pub, chatting up girls, or anything like that. They're always firing at each other the whole time. And I don't know, I suppose maybe that's what brothers do. Maybe that's what families do. But yes, Rodney is capable of being a bit of a schemer. And in various episodes, he's tried to break away from Del to do something, and Del has either helped him cock it up or he's bailed him out of it if it's gone wrong. But yeah, Rodney has been desperate to stand on his own 2 feet for years. And I think it was only when he met Cassandra that he actually realized that it was time to start breaking away from Del. John Sullivan isn't afraid to write about anything. There are no subjects that he won't touch upon. In various episodes, we've had, miscarriages, people dying, real life stuff that happens, but not necessarily you expect to see it in a situation comedy. And he's very clever the way he can just lead an audience up the garden path until you're convinced that you know what's going to happen and you're ready for the big laugh, and then something tragic will happen. Or vice versa, something tragic has happened and you're watching something very, very sad, and then all of a sudden you're laughing your head off. He's just so clever the way he can interweave all the emotions. It's a roller coaster ride reading a John Sullivan script, because you never know what's going to happen next. You know it's going to be hysterically funny, but you're pretty certain there's going to be some very touching moments in there. I mean, Leonard had some marvellous speeches in the early, I suppose, first 3 series, where we were talking about war and all this sort of thing. It was amazing, really amazing man. When Leonard died, we'd already started filming with Leonard. We were a couple of weeks into filming, and we heard he had a heart attack. And we continued filming as best we could without Leonard. There were various scenes that David and I had to do, and we were hoping that he would make a full recovery, as he was. And then we'd all get together, and maybe he'd be on a slightly lighter schedule, obviously be on a lighter schedule, but we could still get the show done. And then a few days later, David and I were in the makeup wagon, getting made up. It's very early one morning, and Ray just came into the doorway and looked at us both and shook his head and left. And so we went back to our caravans, and David and I were pretty convinced that was it. We certainly didn't feel funny anymore. But the series had been commissioned, and we were halfway through it. So we had about 5 days off, I think, with frantic phone calls going on between everyone. And the first reaction was, we'll just replace Grandad. We'll get another character of Grandad in. John was dead set against that, as David and I were. So the idea of having another relative come in, that was probably the best idea. But John, being such a genius, decided to introduce him at Grandad's funeral. And that was incredibly difficult to shoot, because I think we did it somewhere just outside Hammersmith, and it was freezing cold and the snow was falling. And David and I are just staring into this grave. And we'd done it for real the week before. So that was a very, very difficult thing to try and get our head around. And we were all very sad, because all the crew knew Leonard, and he was a much loved man. And then to actually film his funeral was a very, very hard thing to do. And then right at the very end of it, we throw Grandad's hat into the grave. And I'm in floods of tears. And David, and everyone was. And then the vicar turns round and says, "Has anyone seen my hat?" And the audience just go, "Woof!" So that's the kind of genius we're talking about with John Sullivan. He can just turn the saddest of occasions into a belting laugh. And vice versa, he can do it the other way around too. He can turn a belting laugh into something immensely sad. Basically, as long as the Trotter family stay together, they will all be fine. There is a tremendous bond between them. There's a great love between them. With Del, with Rodney, with Grandad, with Uncle Albert, with Cassandra, with Tessa's character, Raquel. There is a tremendous love. They all love each other. I'm not saying it's all lovey-dovey stuff, because they all argue, but then all families argue. But I think it would have been very boring if you'd have had all of us just scoring points and shouting at each other the whole time. I don't think the audience would have enjoyed watching that one bit. So that there had to be an affection, a genuine affection, which fortunately we all felt anyway. So that wasn't hard to act. But yeah, it would have been dull just to watch three grown men fighting each other the whole time. I think that's another reason why John has been so clever and the series has been so successful, is because it has grown with the times. It has mentioned Thatcherism, buying your own council place. Everything that's been happening socially in this country in the last 20 years, at some stage or another, has been mentioned in an episode of Fools and Horses, I think. And it would be very boring for the nation to tune in at Christmas time and think, here we go again. Here's the three guys sitting around, going out to flog a bit of this, then coming back and arguing. I mean, that's not a successful TV show. That's how it started out, and it grew from there. And it really took off. I mean, when we started it, Series 1, I think, was watched by myself, David, and my Auntie Peggy in Chessington, and that was it. No one else saw it. We were getting less than half of the normal viewers that contemporary shows were getting at the same time. We'd go out on I can't remember what day it was, midweek, a good slot, but all of a sudden it was only 6-7 million people, and then the comedy show that was on the next day was getting 18. And we thought, well, we're funnier, aren't we? What are we missing here? Why isn't anyone watching us? And that carried on throughout Series 1. Through most of Series 2, I think we only gained a couple of million, which isn't very much, considering there were no other channels. There were I think video recorders had only just come in, but there was certainly nothing like Sky or BSB and all the various cable channels, which do now make a dent in the ratings. But then it was BBC One, BBC Two and ITV, and that was it. And I think it was only when the repeats of Series 2 went out that it started this gradual climb. People were obviously going, I quite like it. I've seen this one before, I quite like it, so I'll watch it. And then it just, whoosh, took off for 2 or 3 years after that. There was an episode where I had to play with Boycie and Marlene's dog called Duke. It was a big Great Dane, and I think it was an episode called not the Prussians are coming, from Prussia with Love. It was about a pregnant German girl, anyway. And in the course of this episode, I had to go out and play with their big dog in the garden, and then I'm supposed to come running in and say something and get on with the scene. Anyway, the dog turned up, and typical animal trainer speak. He said, "Oh no, it's all right. I'll do anything you want. Do anything you want. It's work to my command." I said, "Well, what we'd ideally like it to do is to put both paws on Nick's shoulders, and then Nick will just fall over backwards, and that's it." "Okay, fine. Come on then, dog." I can't remember what the real dog's name was, or the dog's real name was. So he said, "Come on then, Duke, put your hands on that." Nothing. This dog is just, "Come on, up you go, take 2. Come on, up you go." The trainer's going, come on, up you go. This dog's nothing. So I said, well, look, why don't I just try and wind it up a bit over the coffee break, because we were due a 10-minute coffee break. It doesn't know me, it's not fair, really. So if I play with it for 10 minutes and, we get to know each other, maybe I can make it do it rather than the trainer do it. Okay, fine. So I spent my coffee break throwing sticks and balls for this dog, and it was gradually getting more and more excited about the whole idea. 20 minutes went past, and I'm saying, come on, see if you can do it, and it did it, bang, but the camera wasn't turning. I said, it did it, so we started again, turned over, action. I'm like, come on there, dog, up you come, like this, and this dog went, woof, bang, knocked me down like this. The camera pulls out, and you can see it in the episode that the dog is treading all over me, but it's very carefully edited, because what you don't see is that the dog got rather too excited and actually had me. That bit's cut out. You could just see the dog sort of manoeuvring into position, and it's got its paws on my shoulder blades, and what you don't see is the next few seconds. And the crew were really, really helpful. They fell about. They were on their knees. Well, weren't we all? But he still writes, the dog, just occasionally, Christmas cards, things like that. There was an episode called To Hull and Back, where John had written a sequence where we get lost in the North Sea, and we actually go to a gas rig and ask directions. So we all piled aboard this tub of a steamer called the Inga. I mean, it looked very good, but it was seaworthy, but it's, it wasn't the Oriana. And so we all chugged out from Hull to go out to this oil rig, gas rig. But it was about a 7-hour trip. So what they decided to do was chopper out one crew to go out to the gas rig, so as it could take shots from the oil rig, gas rig, looking down at the boat, coming towards it. And whilst we were chugging out for 7 hours and chugging back for 7 hours, we could film all the stuff that we had to do on board the boat. We thought it'd be a good time-saving device, save having to go out all the time and reschedule different days. Okay, fine. So 30 or so of us went out on the boat, chugging away. And I'm okay on the water, and Ray's okay on the water, and David's okay on the water. But it was one of those seas, I don't know if you've ever been on one, it wasn't choppy by any means, and it was quite hot, and it was quite still. But there was a very large swell running on this sea, and it was a slight cross beam. So the ship was pitching and it was rolling as well. So out of the 25 to 30 people that started out on this voyage, by the time we got to the rig, most of them have gone bright green and are being sick. I mean, there are people parking custards over the side like you would not believe. Wardrobe, gone completely, all of them are gone. Sparks, gone. Gaffers, gone. Buster, salty old sea dog, bless his heart, he's parking custards over the back and had been for the last 4 hours. So, of course, we get to this oil rig and the crew are up there waiting to say, all right, where is everyone? Can you see Buster? Where's the camera? And it turned out that Makeup was doing the clapperboard and pulling focus, because the camera assistant, he was at the back with Buster and Wardrobe and Sparks and Gaffers. It was awful. And then, of course, we did our bit. We all pulled ourselves together, and, of course, all the crew that were sick had to go down below so as the camera couldn't see them. Well, you know what's going to happen. You go below on a diesel engine boat, you feel seasick anyway. Every so often, somebody would just interrupt the shot by coming up and going, "Ugh!" So we'd have to go round again. Say, do you feel better now? Okay, now get back down in that bloody hole and wait till we finish filming before you're sick again. And then we had a 7-hour trip back. It was a long, long day. A long day. The Reliant Robin, it was an absolutely perfect car for the Trotters to drive around in, but that's the kindest way of putting this. It's not the most forgiving car to drive. To the point if you corner it too fast it'll go over, because it's only got one wheel at the front. And we decided, or John decided, it'd be nice if we could get smoke and things coming out of it and backfires and all this sort of stuff, which we actually controlled on a little panel between the two seats. We had one for smoke and one for the backfire. There were little explosives that would go off that special effects boys had rigged up. And the first time we tried it went okay, but the cameras were saying, well, we can't really see the smoke. So if you can give it a bit more smoke. And I think what they did, we'd hit a switch, and that would pump Red X, I think it's called, into the engine, which would generate more smoke out of the back. Okay, fine. So we're pumping all this stuff in there, and they said, okay, action, and we were thundering along, and David said, all right, I'll hit the backfire button now, bang, and that went off nicely. Okay, hit the smoke, bang. And there was a cloud of smoke coming out of the back. We couldn't see anything, but what we hadn't realised was that the Reliant Robin probably wasn't the most airtight car in the world. So this plume of smoke just came out from between our legs, and we were driving blind for the last 50 yards of this shot and choking our hearts up. We got the shot done eventually, but there was another episode where they said, we're going to fly this car over a bridge. I think it was an episode called Dates, where Rodney has a car chase in this thing. And they said, do you want to do it? And I said, no, I'm not driving that thing anything beyond 35 miles an hour, thank you very much. It was bad enough driving it over the Humber Bridge between all these bloody great juggernauts. No way am I going to fly it. So they got a stuntman down, and he took one look at it and took one look at the location and said, okay, I want full body armour for this. I want the lot. I want neck braces, back braces, leg braces, the lot. And they said, well, you haven't got to fly it very far. He said, yeah, but I've never flown one of these things before. I don't know what's going to happen. He said, my money is on the engine coming out when I hit. He said, because it'll come down on the front wheel, that'll push the engine out. It's a fiberglass car, so if the engine's coming out, it's going to hit me. So we all think, it's got a bit serious now, hasn't it? But he knew his stuff, and he landed it very well, and the engine didn't come out. I think we broke the roof rack or anything, but there's no way I was going to fly that car. Not a chance. A typical filming day would start with us. If we were filming in the winter, we'd get to the location pre-dawn, so we would rehearse the stuff we'd learnt before, the night before the sun came up, so as the cameras could have a look at it all. And then as the sun was coming up, David and I would go and get dressed and made up and everything. Cameras would rig up, lights would rig up, and then we'd start. And we'd make it, the dawn would be up or whatever, and we'd wait a few more minutes until the sun finally rose, and then we'd start work, because we only had until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon before we lost the light again, certainly in December, which we certainly filmed right up until the last few days, sometimes before it was due to go out. So David and I would get to work, having learnt scenes 2, 3, 4 and 5, to be met with somebody saying, have you learnt scenes 2, 3, 4 and 5? We go, yeah, learnt them last night. Okay, well, could you just have a quick look at scenes 4, 9, 11 and 17? It's just that we think it would probably be better to do it in this location rather than waste daylight time going over there, so we're going to do those here. We will do those tomorrow or the next day. So I used to tease David, and my apologies to Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry, because we'd just sit in our caravans surrounded by pieces of script, some of which we'd learned and some of which we hadn't learned, but we were supposed to, in the next 30 minutes, learn the day's dialogue. And I looked at him one day, and he was just staring blankly at these pages, not knowing which ones to look at, and I just said to him, I know what you're thinking. Do we learn scene 5 or scene 6? Well, in all the excitement, I've kind of forgotten myself, but you've got to remember you're looking at the pages of Only Fools and Horses. The most powerful sitcom in the world laugh your head clean off. And what you got to ask yourself is, do I feel funny today? Well, do you? Dave? Because it got absolutely frantic. We did not know from one minute to the next, sometimes, what we were supposed to learn at all. And people would say, you coming down to the bar for a drink after work? We go, we'll come down and get drunk with you guys, yeah. And then we'll just turn up for work and go, oh, sorry, did you want us to learn that? No, sorry, no, we went for a drink instead. So basically, our days revolved around getting out to work in the dark, getting cold, learning whatever we could, and then going back to our hotel rooms, getting soup and sarnies from room service, and learning the next day's job. It's the glamour, it's just glamour. There was one story when we were filming in Miami, which nearly got me into trouble. Incidentally, it was lovely for David and I to go to Miami because we weren't known there, so we could go into bars, and for the first time in 18, 20 years or so, we could sit down at a bar and have a beer together, and no one would take any notice. Of course, there was the occasional British tourist, but more often than not, the locals would just say, oh, you're Brits, hi, welcome to Florida, and that would be it. So that was nice. But we were filming in, it was Coral Gables, and there's a huge hotel there called the Biltmore Hotel, which has a great big tower. And David was filming there. They were doing some split screen stuff, because if you remember on that episode, he was playing two characters. He was playing Dale, and he was playing the mafia boss, Don Occhetti. And I thought, well, I've got a day off. And I've got 2 or 3 days off in Florida. What shall I do? So I phoned up my, not my local, but the airfield closest to where we were staying, and asked whether I could get a checkout ride down and maybe hire an aircraft, because I fly airplanes. And they said, yeah, sure, come on down and we'll give you a checkout ride and all this sort of stuff. And obviously, because I'd never flown in America before, I had a safety pilot with me. And we did all the briefings and all that sort of stuff. And we did the stuff that's required of a pilot to make sure he's safe to fly. And he said, okay, right, it's all yours now. You just have a fly around, and where do you want to go? And in the distance, I could see the Biltmore Tower, and I said, is it all right if we just head on over there? Because I know there's some friends of mine working over there, and it's about their lunch break now, so can we just go and buzz the building? And he went, yeah, sure, you do whatever you want. Go for it. And so I went over there, and I could see the tower, and I thought, oh, I wonder if there's anyone out on the balcony, because I knew they were filming right inside this tower. And so I dipped a wing and went not too close, never too close. And as I came round for another zoom, I could see 2 or 3 people waving. So I thought, oh, they're on lunch break. Okay, fine. Well, I'll go a bit closer. I'll go around again, bit lower, bit tighter, round the thing. Oh, look, there's a few more people coming out now. Oh, look at them all waving. Oh, aren't they friendly? So I'm dipping wings and blipping the engine and generally showing off and everything. And then I went round for the 3rd time, and I realised they weren't waving at all. They were going. And they had just that second got to the most complicated part of the split screen, which is complicated to do at the best of times. And they just got to the bit where David meets himself in this bit, which takes hours to do anyway. And they had just about finished it when this spotty Herbert came along in his aircraft going, all right, mate. And not only buzzed them once, I didn't screw it up once, I screwed it up 3 times for them. Sorry, chaps.